Imagine being jolted awake at 3 in the morning by someone pounding on your door, claiming to be HOA security, demanding entry, threatening to break in. The shadows outside are alive with danger. Your child is trembling behind you, and every second feels like it could be the last before the lock gives way. But then your 12-year-old makes one call that flips the entire story on its head. If you want to hear how this fake cop met real justice and how a kid became a hero of the night, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one. The first sound that jolted me awake was not the hum of the fan or the creak of the house settling in the cool of the night. It was the bang, a deep, violent pound that rattled the doorframe and sent a shock through my chest. I shot upright in bed, clutching the blanket with both hands, as if cloth could shield me from whatever stood outside. Another bang followed, harder, sharper, accompanied by a metallic scrape that set my teeth on edge. My ears strained in the silence between blows until a man's voice cut through the night. "Open up, HOA security, you are in violation community rules." The words landed heavy and absurd. My alarm clock glowed in the dark. 3:07, the dead of night. Who in their right mind bangs on a door claiming HOA business at 3 in the morning? I froze in place listening. The next slam was louder. The door shuddered visibly as though it would give in with one more hit. "Open up now or we will come in." The voice was hard and commanding, like someone used to barking orders and expecting obedience. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floorboards, my pulse drumming. So loud, I wondered if it gave me away. A creak underfoot betrayed me. Then I heard a softer voice from the hallway. "Mom." I turned sharply and saw Ethan, my 12-year-old, standing in the dim light of the hallway, in his wrinkled pajamas, his hair sticking up in tufts, his eyes wide. Fear flashed across his small face. "Go back to bed," I whispered, desperate to keep him away from the pounding at the door. "But, Mom." Another violent blow shook the door, cut him off. My heart lurched. That was not knocking anymore. That was someone trying to force their way in. "Stay behind me," I said, my whisper sharp, as I pushed him gently back. I edged toward the door, pressing my eye to the peephole. What I saw froze my breath. A man stood there broad-shouldered in a cheap navy jacket, with the word security stenciled across the back in cracked white letters. A crooked badge hung from a lanyard on his chest, but even in the poor light, it looked like something bought at a novelty shop. He gripped a heavy flashlight, like a weapon. His cap shadowed most of his face, but his mouth twisted into a smirk, as if this moment belonged to him. He leaned close, so close that as I nearly met mine through the peephole. I said, "Open up, this is HOA business." The arrogance in his tone washed over me. It was not official. It was not right. This was a man playing dress-up in power. My stomach knotted with anger that tangled with fear. Behind me, Ethan whispered, "Mom, he's going to break in." His voice was trembling, but steady enough to cut through the pounding in my ears. The next slam against the door confirmed it. The frame groaned. The lock strained. Every instinct screamed to call for help. My fingers shook as I reached for my phone. But before I could press the numbers, Ethan tugged at my sleeve with surprising firmness. "I already called." He whispered, his eyes shining with both terror and determination. My breath caught. "Called who?" "The real police." The world seemed to pause in that instant. The pounding continued, the shouts grew louder, but beneath it all there was the echo of sirens in the distance, faint but growing. A flicker of hope sparked in my chest as I looked down at my son. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He was small, but he was unshaken. The banging at the door became furious, now the man roaring threats. "Last chance, open this door, or I will come in." But for the first time that night, the fear loosened its grip on me, because the decision was no longer just mine. Ethan had already made the call that mattered most. He had already chosen not to surrender to fear, and the intruder did not yet know that his time was running out. The next strike against the door was violent enough to shake the walls and rattle the picture frames. The sound split the night like thunder, and for a moment I thought the wood might splinter beneath the force. My throat tightened as the lock screeched under pressure. Ethan clutched my arm, his small fingers digging into my skin. His eyes were wide, yet his chin lifted stubbornly, as though daring the intruder to try again. His courage stunned me, though fear trembled in every line of his body. I pressed the chair against the knob, hoping by time, though, I knew it was flimsy protection. My hand shook, but my mind burned with anger. What kind of man storms a house at 3 a.m. pretending to be an officer of rules that should never carry such weight? Another crash followed, and the lock snapped with a sharp crack. The door swung open and slammed against the wall, the chair skidding uselessly across the floor. The man stepped inside with the smug stride of someone convinced of his authority. His flashlight beam swept across the living room, illuminating Ethan and me as though we were criminals caught in the act. His jacket hung loosely on his frame. The word security stretched across the back in peeling paint, and the cheap badge on his chest glinted under the porch light. House inspection, he declared, his tone dripping with mock command. Community violations. You are coming with me. I planted myself in front of Ethan, my voice trembling with fury. Get out. You are not with the HOA. He smirked as though my defiance amused him. He stepped farther, and his boots heavy on the floor. You think I need permission to enforce order? You are nothing but a repeat offender. Trash cans left too long. Grass not cut. A boy who does not respect rules, his eyes locked on Ethan and his smile twisted. And a little brat who thinks calling the police will save him. My blood boiled. He knew. Somehow he knew Ethan had already called. I felt Ethan stiffen behind me, but he did not back down. They are coming, Ethan said, his voice steady though his fists were clenched tight. The man's smile faltered for the first time, a crack in the armor of arrogance. He laughed harshly, covering the slip. Police at this hour. They do not care about a kid or a lawn or a family that cannot follow rules. I run this neighborhood. But then a sound cut through his words and silenced the air. The faint rising wail of sirens. Far off at first, but growing clearer each second. His grin vanished, replaced with a flash of panic that he tried to mask with rage. He jabbed his flashlight toward me. This is not finished, he hissed, his voice sharp and venomous. The red and blue light streaked across the walls as the sirens closed in. My heart pounded, but this time with relief, not terror. The scales had shifted. Ethan's eyes met mine, and in them I saw the truth. We had been moments from collapse, yet his courage had summoned the only force that mattered. The man could no longer pretend his fake authority was enough. He turned toward the door, retreating into the night, just as a police cruiser screeched to a halt outside. And in that instant I knew the game had changed. The intruder who believed himself untouchable was about to be stripped bare under the weight of real justice. The police stormed into the yard, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, their voices commanding and sharp. The intruder who only moments earlier had strutted through my doorway with arrogant confidence now stumbled back, his hands raised, his face paling under the harsh beams of real authority. This is a misunderstanding, he sputtered, his words tumbling over one another in desperation. I am part of the security team. I was just enforcing the rules. The officers barely looked at him before one snapped, hands where we can see them now. The man froze, then tried again, his voice cracking under the weight of his own lies. Look, I was only protecting the community. People leave trash out. They let lawns grow wild. I was keeping order. But Ethan stepped forward, a small frame steady, his voice ringing clear in the night. He broke into our house. He scared us. He is not security. The officers exchanged a brief look, one of grim certainty. We will take it from here, kid, the taller officer said firmly before moving in. The intruder thrashed as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, his bravado collapsing into frantic shouts. You do not understand. I am the HOA. I make the rules here. His voice carried across the street, pulling neighbors from their houses. One by one, doors open, lights flicked on, and people stepped onto porches blinking against the blue and red glow. Phones appeared raised high to capture every moment. Whispers spread quickly. That is Carl. He lives 2 streets over, someone muttered. Another added, I always thought he was off, but never like this. The crowd grew as a man shouted wild excuses, his words spilling out desperate and incoherent. I was only trying to help. They needed discipline. Someone has to keep order. But the recording spoke louder than he ever could. His cheap jacket, his fake badge, his forced authority now stood under the scrutiny of dozens of cameras and the judgment of real law. His arrogance had once been his weapon, but now it was the very thing tearing him apart. As the police led him to the squad car, the weight of eyes on him made his shoulders hunch. His swagger had vanished, replaced by the trembling of a man stripped of every ounce of power he once imagined he held. The neighbors murmured louder, their voices rising in disbelief and ridicule. Videos hit social media. Within minutes, the headlines spreading like fire across local feeds. Fake HOA cop breaks into family home. Read one caption, while another mocked, neighborhood tyrant meets real police. I stood with Ethan by my side watching as justice unfolded under flashing lights. His small hand slipped into mine, warm, steady, and sure. My chest tightened with pride. The man who had terrified us in the dead of night was no longer a looming shadow. He was just Carl, a neighbor drunk on control, paraded in handcuffs before the very community he had tried to rule. But even as the squad car door slammed shut, I knew this was not the end. This was only the spark. The neighbors would not forget what they saw, and the HOA board could not wash their hands of the chaos Carl had created. And though relief coursed through me as the patrol cars pulled away, a new fire burned in my chest. This battle was far from over. The rules that had enabled him to fear, that had fueled him, and the arrogance that had blinded him still lingered in the cracks of our neighborhood. Ethan looked up at me, his voice quiet but certain. "Mom, this is not finished, is it?" I squeezed his hand, my eyes fixed on the retreating lights. "No, it is only just beginning." The days that followed were a blur of conversations, whispers, and meetings that stretched across the neighborhood like wildfire. Carl's arrest had shattered the illusion of order the HOA had built for years. The neighbors who once stayed quiet now stood taller, their voices louder, fueled by outrage and the memory of flashing lights outside my home. The board scrambled to distance themselves, their letters typed in stiff language, claiming Carl was never authorized to act in their name, that he was simply a rogue resident. But the people no longer cared for excuses. They had seen him shouting about power, seen him claim he was the HOA itself, and seen how quickly the false crown fell when faced with real law. Ethan was the quiet hero of it all. Reporters came with microphones, neighbors stopped by with praise, his name whispered in admiration. He never boasted, though his shoulders carried a new strength, his eyes a calm resilience. He asked me one night if calling the police had really made that much difference, if anyone else would have done the same. I told him the truth. Many people freeze when fear claws at their throat. He had acted. That was courage. Carl faces reckoning in the courtroom, his once smug grin gone, replaced by a hollow glare. The charges were clear, breaking and entering, impersonating an officer harassment. The recordings played before the jury painted him not as a guardian of order, but as a predator who craved control. His words echoed across the chamber. "I am the HOA, I make the rules," twisted now into evidence of delusion. The verdict was swift. Guilty. The sentence sealed his downfall. The same neighbors who once bowed their heads under his threats now sat in the gallery, their faces lit with satisfaction as the gavel struck. Carl slumped in his chair, shackled, not only by chains, but by the weight of humiliation. Outside the courthouse, the community found its voice. Petitions formed demanding reform, transparency, limits to the board's reach. People who had paid fine after fine now challenged every rule. The fear that once kept them silent dissolved into unity, forged in the chaos of one man's arrogance. Through it all, Ethan stood beside me, quiet but unwavering. The boy who had once trembled in the hallway at 3 a.m. now walked with a steadiness that even adults noticed. His story spread beyond our block, the local paper, calling him the 12-year-old who outsmarted the fake cop. Online clips of his 911 calls circulated, a small, brave voice that carried more power than Carl ever had. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the porches, Ethan sat beside me, his legs swinging off the step. "Mom, do you think he hates me?" he asked, his tone soft but thoughtful. I brushed his hair back, meeting his steady eyes. "He does not matter anymore. What matters is that you stood up when it counted. You showed everyone that fear does not rule us." He smiled shyly, though pride flickered across his face. "I just did not want him to win." "And he did not," I answered firmly. The neighborhood changed slowly but surely. The HOA no longer barked commands without challenge. People talked openly, shared frustrations, supported each other. The grip of petty authority loosened, replaced by something stronger: community. Carl's name became a punchline, a meme, a story parents told their children about false power and real consequences. His cheap jacket, his fake badge, his midnight threats, all reduced to fragments of ridicule, replayed endlessly online. Justice had not only been served, it had been witnessed, recorded, shared, until there was no room for doubt. He had tried to wear power like armor, but the truth had torn it away piece by piece, leaving him exposed before the very people he sought to control. On that quiet evening sitting with Ethan as the cicadas hummed and the air cooled, I realized the battle was not simply about one man or one night. It was about the line between fear and courage, about the difference between authority and tyranny. And the lesson lingered sharp and clear. A man can fake a badge. He can fake a uniform. He can even fake confidence enough to break down a door. But he cannot fake justice. Ethan leaned against my shoulder, his breath steady, his small hand warm in mine. For the first time since that night, I felt peace settle deep and unshakable. The story had begun with terror and ended with truth. And in that truth, my son had found his strength. In that truth, a neighborhood had found its voice. And in that truth, a bully who believed himself untouchable had fallen at last, stripped of every illusion, under the weight of the justice he never thought would come.